first episode in our Top 10 Movies of the Decade series. I'm Henry Higgins, and this episode is focusing on the top 10 movies of 2010. I have my notes here, so I will be referring to them. So if you see my eyes drop, that's why. But let's get cracking. As mentioned in the rules video, it's 10 movies per episode, one movie from each year, going to the final episode to battle it out to see what will be our favourite / best movie of the entire decade, 2010 to 2019. So without any further ado, let's get the ball rolling with 2010. And in at number 10 is the ATeam reboot, starring Liam Neeson, Bradley Cooper, Jessica Biel, Rampage Jackson, Charlton Copley, and Patrick Wilson. Now, taking a much-loved TV show from the 80s and updating it for a modern era was a risk. Obviously, nostalgia is very powerful. People of my age especially grew up watching the ATeam TV show, and the characters were so well defined in that show, and the actors were synonymous with the characters, like Mr. T is B.A. Baracus. But in this movie, they managed to get a cast to fill in the shoes of the greats from that TV show. So George Pepper, Dirk Benedict, Mr. T, as I mentioned, and Dwight Schultz were all ably replaced by Liam Neeson, Rampage Jackson, as I mentioned, Bradley Cooper, and Charlton Copley, who I had only seen beforehand in District 9. And this is, when I say it's a reboot, it's technically it's a prequel to the TV series, because it shows how they become the ATeam, and when we see in the movie, in the TV show, they talk about the crime they didn't commit being the reason they're on the run. This movie establishes what that crime was and how they become this roving band of vigilantes. But Liam Neeson as Hannibal Smith is absolutely perfect. This was not long after Taken, which reinvented him as an action hero, as unlikely as that may seem. Bradley Cooper is absolutely perfect as Templeton Peck Face. He has some wonderful scenes in the movie. Rampage Jackson, UFC champion, light heavyweight champion, or former UFC light heavyweight champion, is also a great replacement for Mr. T. I do prefer Mr. T's version, but again, is that nostalgia coming into it? But he is fantastic in that role as well. And Charlton Copley just doesn't care. When he's in this, when I say he doesn't care, I mean like he has no qualms with just going all out. Like he doesn't care in that sense. It's absolutely fantastic. The action is amazing. The set pieces are awesome, especially the shipyard finale. Patrick Wilson is good value as the villain, the catalyst for everything that's going on. And for me, it's sad that while this was the beginning of the group on screen, it seems like that was the end of the group on screen. The movie didn't do that well. It kind of had average reviews, and box office wise it was kind of middling as well. So they never went back to it, but I would love to have seen a follow-up on these guys. And that's why the ATeam is our number 10 movie this year. In at number 9 is the reboot of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, anyone who knows me, who's followed the channel, followed me on social media, whatever, knows I am a huge advocate for movie remakes, especially horror ones, but movie remakes in general. A good movie is a good movie, a bad movie is a bad movie, regardless of whether the story has been told before. And A Nightmare on Elm Street the original is a seminal horror movie. It's classic for a number of different reasons. If you haven't seen it, I urge you to go and do so. It is an absolutely fantastic horror movie. Rations the use of the villain very well, and obviously created a horror icon in Freddy Krueger. The reboot, the remake, is also really well done. It modernises things for the current era, bringing in certain scientific facts and other things, technology such like, that is modern day, that wasn't available or wasn't known back when the original was made. Recasting Robert Englund was always going to be an uphill battle. But Jackie Earle Haley, who I loved in Watchmen, I think that's a universally praised portrayal of Rorschach. He is fantastic as the villain. There's still quips, but they've dialed it back like they did in New Nightmare. They dialed back the comedy. They removed a lot of the overtly nod and wink humour for more sadistic, cruel humour. When the reboot / remake of Friday the 13th, which actually remade essentially the first 4 movies, this was due to Jason being the star of the series, but not showing up properly until part 2. And Jason is the Friday the 13th series. So the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot does something similar, but with more subtlety. As I mentioned, casting someone who plays Robert Englund is a near impossible task. He's so good in the series. He plays the sadistic, nasty, vile Freddy very well. He plays the ridiculous, campy, jokey Freddy equally as good. I and I think a lot of others prefer the former. Again, watch No Nightmare if you haven't. That for me is the best version of Freddy. Even though I'm more of a fan of the actual glove rather than the organic hand version. But replacing him, as I said, was a near impossible task. Not just because he was so good, but because of what I mentioned in the ATeam section. Nostalgia is a very powerful drug. Nostalgia can cloud you. It allows us to cover over any faults that what we're being nostalgic about had. In wrestling, the Attitude Era is a perfect example. I was the perfect age to go through the Attitude Era in wrestling, and when it was at its best, it was amazing, but when it was at its worst, it was worse than anything that's been put out today. And that's where nostalgia comes in. We only remember the best things. So with this, things are swept under the rug or they're embraced as so bad it's good. But in Jackie Earle Haley, they found someone not only to portray the Dream Demon version of Freddy Krueger, but also the pre-death human form of Freddy, who in this version is a handyman at a school. Certain aspects being updated to the reboot make it stand apart from the original. This includes Freddy having his originally scripted MO, which was a child molester rather than an out-and-out just child killer. That was dropped in the original because the studios balked at the idea at the time. The introduction of micronaps in the reboot is a fantastic addition because they're a real occurrence. We've all had that where we've kind of zoned out and kind of fell asleep, even just for like 10-15 seconds. That's a micronap. And for that period of time, you are asleep. And for someone like Freddy Krueger, who comes to you through your dreams, even if you are asleep for such a short period of time, he can come and get you. They also toned down, as I mentioned, a lot of the silliness and the campiness. The later films embodied, which New Nightmare, which is my favourite of the entire series, also did very well. The inventiveness in the dream sequences. The first movie had some good dream sequences. I think 3 and 4 in the original series where the dream sequences peaked. In the reboot, they find a really good middle ground of it not being too fantastical. But some of the dream sequences in the reboot is fantastic. Especially when it comes to when you die, your brain kind of dies last. It's why someone technically has to be brain dead. That's why they're kept on ventilators. So Freddy can still play with someone even after they're technically dead. for a few minutes, and he uses that to great effect in the movie as well. New Nightmare still remains my favourite in the series, but the 2010 reboot is still a really good horror movie. The opening scene is peak Nightmare on Elm Street, and it deserves. I think this series deserves to be continued with a sequel. I think too much time has passed, and that's not going to happen. But it's a great movie, and it makes number 9 on our list. Despite what you might think with the movie that makes number 8, the whole list isn't just remakes and reboots, but number 8 is another remake, and it's The Crazies. It's a 2010 movie, obviously, directed by Brock Elsner, and it stars Timmy Olyphant, who I think is vastly underrated as an actor, as a leading man. Radha Mitchell and Joe Anderson and Daniel Panabaker's in it as well. And it's a remake from a 70s movie. So we've got 3 remakes / reboots on the list for the first 3 entries, which goes to show how remakes can be great. Not all some remakes do suck. When I say I'm an advocate for remakes, I mean that, but I am not blind to the fact that some remakes are absolutely terrible. I will go to my grave on the hill that the Psycho remake was an experiment, and it was a failed experiment, but it was an experiment to see what makes a good movie, because that was essentially a shot-for-shot remake of the original script and everything. So is it the actors and the direction that make a movie? Is it the script? That kind of is the filmography. I think it was an experiment. It wasn't taken as such. So that is a terrible movie, but for a reason. Other remakes are absolute abominations. But this one, The Crazies, is actually much better than the original. It's standard small town. Something's happening to the population, but we don't know what. Hence the title of The Crazies. People start going on homicidal rampages, that kind of thing. But in this one, it's all put together fantastically well. Timmy Olyphant is fantastic in the leading role. The premise is simple, and it's not far-fetched enough to actually stretch plausibility. Mind-altering drugs do exist. Chemicals do exist that enrage and cause people to get aggressively violent. So these things do exist. The gore and the kills are fantastically done on screen. They work really well, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's a relatively short runtime. Tension is palpable throughout this movie, and it's one of the movies in my back pocket whenever anyone goes to their remakes equal bad shtick. This is one of the movies I whip out to say, there you go, a remake that was better than the original. Other movies that I bring out, because a lot of times people don't realise some movies are remakes. Like the 1930s Wizard of Oz with Judy Garland is a remake. People don't realise that a lot of the time. And when you tell them, they're kind of shocked. You look at Ben-Hur, the Charlton Heston movie, that's a remake. And that is a fantastic film as well. And there's various ways certain movies are just great. And a lot of times people haven't seen the original. So even if it is a remake, like Scarface, I would wager that 50-60%, maybe more, of the people who have seen the Al Pacino Scarface have not seen the original Scarface. And I would wager that some of the people who went and saw the original Scarface did so because they saw the remake first. And that is another reason why remakes are essential, but that's a story for another time. It's a story I've also told before, rather ironically. But yeah, The Crazies is a great little horror movie. It's one of those that sneaked under the radar, but it's fantastic, and I urge you to seek it out. The Crazies in at number 8. So we're 3 for 3 in the remakes at the moment. Let's see if number 7 can come in with a combo breaker. Number 7 is not a remake. It is an adaptation from a comic, but it is not a remake, and it's the movie Legion, starring Paul Bettany, known mostly today for being Vision in the Avengers movies. He has the same kind of stoic acting style in this movie that he does as Vision, and it fits the character really well. It also has Lucas Black, who was in Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, Tyrese Gibson, who was also in the Fast and Furious franchise, Adrian Palicki, Charles S. Dutton, fantastic character actor, Kevin Durand, who I just think is a phenomenal actor and doesn't get enough work. He could be a fantastic leading man if they just gave him a chance to do so. It also has Willa Holland, who plays Thea in the Arrowverse. This was the first thing I ever saw her in. It also has Kate Walsh and Dennis Quaid, and Doug Jones doing his Doug Jones thing. It's directed by Scott Stewart, someone who I'm not really familiar with, but the movie is essentially the story of the apocalypse. It's the rapture. God has had enough, and we're going to be taken out. However, if a baby is born, there's this catalyst. If a new baby is born, it's an innocent life, then the rapture will be prevented. So God is sending his angels to take out and kill this child. And Bethany plays the Archangel Michael, who gives up his archangelness to protect the child. That's your premise. Now, to quote Cinema Wins, which is a great channel you should check out. I love his videos. So much positivity, so much looking at the good in any movie. Not ignoring the faults, but he does a wonderful job of accentuating the positives in any movie. And it has made me look at some movies that I wasn't a fan of in a different light. So yeah, check him out if you can. But Paul Bettany, to quote Cinema Wins, is always a win. His demeanour and acting style, as I said, is perfectly suited to playing the Archangel Michael, while Lucas Black and Dennis Quaid give respectable support. Willa Holland announced herself to the world in this role. She is absolutely stunning in this film. And Kevin Durand, as the Archangel Gabriel, is the perfect counterfoil to the Archangel Michael. Brutal, vicious, violent. The effects are fantastic. The violence is striking in this movie. The concept and the premise work so well, and it sets itself up for a sequel that came in the form of a slightly disappointing TV show called Dominion. It was showered with negative reviews, is lambasted in certain circles. It remains one of my favourite movies, and the majority of that can be laid on the head of Paul Bettany. He made an aesthetically similar movie called Priest, run about the same time as well. This is vastly superior. Legion, if you haven't seen it, I've said this for everyone, and I'm probably going to say it for them all. So I'll just say this now. This will cover the entire series. If you haven't seen any of the movies mentioned in the series, do yourself a favour and go check them out. Legion is a great little religious horror movie, and the concept works so well. It's a movie I go back to very regularly, and it's a movie I will be watching again before the end of the year. The Legion takes our number 7 spot and does indeed break the run of remakes. Reaching the midway point and straight in at number 6 is The Expendables. And this, just, why is this great? Look at the cast, okay? I'm going to read from my notes here. Sylvester Stallone, Jason Statham, Jet Li, Dolph Lundgren, Eric Roberts, Randy Couture, Steve Austin, David Zayas, Terry Crews, and Mickey Rourke. This is great. It's essentially Sylvester Stallone who put it all together. He also directed the movie, parodying and honouring his own legacy. The action movies that made him a star, while putting together a who's who of action stars both from yesteryear and today. Now, it's what we wanted back in the early 90s peak, was to see Arnie, Stallone, Lundgren, Seagal, all of these people all in the same movie in a big crossover. Now, crossovers are very prevalent these days, but back then they were virtually unheard of. I think Alien vs Predator was probably the only 90s one that had any traction. Although there was a Robocop vs Terminator comic book and video game. The Robocop vs Terminator video game is absolutely great. Go and check it out. If you've got access to either a retro console or an emulator, go and check out Robocop vs Terminator. But in the movies, very rarely did we get any real crossovers. Most of the time, they were in the cheap B-movie horror genre. I mean, obviously, back in Universal days, you had Dracula versus Frankenstein and things like that. But in this era, most of the crossovers were in cheap horror movies, either to save money by combining budgets and productions, or the series had run out of steam, so they put them together to try and generate some interest. But in the movies, in the mainstream movies, especially with the action heroes, they were kept separate for a reason, because they were box office name attractions on their own. So they were cash cows, essentially. Expendables sequels obviously built on what was done here with the remakes and everything else. However, back then, like I say, the first one, it was a hell of a risk. Stallone had kind of been on the downslide. A lot of these action heroes had gone past their peak, which is part of the point of the movie as well. And there's also, which I've mentioned before, nostalgia. And remembering what these people were and what these movies were then compared to what they are now, things could start to fall apart. But the Expendables just avoids all that by embracing it and being as over the top as possible. Obviously, it gets more over the top as we go on, which is, you see that in every kind of movie where there's a franchise and a sequel, they have to expand on what came before it, which is why we end up with Jason Voorhees in space. We end up with the Fast and Furious team jumping between very high buildings, and so on and so on. But with this one, everything is put into place. It's basically an over-the-top love letter to the action movies. Big set pieces, the most basic standard plot, Valverde being the place, if you know, you know, and hard as nails henchmen, cliches after cliches, but knowing that they're cliches helps. And just every member of the team having a specific skill is 90s nostalgia in a nutshell. It was brilliant to see them all together. The risk was worth it. You could see everyone was having a blast. And when they built on it over the sequels, more and more action heroes joined the fray because they saw this was the perfect vehicle to put their name out there again, but also have fun with the peers that they were in competition with back in the 80s and 90s. That it became a successful series in its own right, is a testament to how well received the original Expendables was. There's been rumours of a female version for a long time. The Asylum did a lower budget one. Hopefully we do get the proper female Expendables at some point. But for now, the male Expendables series is fantastic fun all the way through. And the first Expendables, fully deserves its place at number 6 on our list. Moving into the top half of the list, we now have a movie called Repo Man. Not as some people first thought when it was mooted a sequel to Repo Man. Fantastic Alex Cox movie. Repo Man stars Jude Law and Forest Whitaker in the main roles. Liev Schreiber, another vastly underrated actor. I love pretty much everything he's ever done. Including X-Men Origins, he was perfect as Victor Crane / Sabretooth. Liev Schreiber, Alice Braga is also great, and Carice Van Houten is in the movie as well. And it's directed by Miguel Sapochnik, who again is a director I'm not very familiar with, but the work on this movie it's fantastic. The premise is essentially it's a corporation, a private healthcare company / insurance firm that provides replacement organs for people and allows them to pay for them over time. Because obviously in America there's no such thing as universal health care as standard. So capitalism rules, and the more money you've got, the easier access you have to these things. However, if you cannot keep up repayments on your new organ, the firm has the titular Repo Man to reclaim their property. Because that's what Repo Men do. You buy a car, or you buy a car on hire purchase, you stop the payments on the car, the company will repossess the car. In this, they're repossessing organs, and of course, it's going to kill you because you have these organs to keep you alive. So the premise is a superb satire on capitalism in general, as well as corporate healthcare fears that everyone has. The performances by the main cast is exceptional. Jude Law is a great leading man. Forrest Whitaker is just one of the best actors of his or any generation. He just brings a certain level of quality to everything that he's in, and it's a joy to watch him and Jude Law play this double act on screen. They've been partners for a while. They've great chemistry, character-wise, and the two actors playing them. The sci-fi concept is slickly put on screen, brought to life through a very smart script. It has great direction, wonderful chemistry between the cast, and a very, very divisive but subversive ending, which will crop up in a different movie in a further episode down the line. Both of the movies actually did it really well, but the ending in this movie is just, it's the perfect sign-off for what the movie is. And Repo Man is a movie that seems to get overlooked by so many people. It reminds me of a great movie from Catherine Bigelow called Strange Days, starring Ray Fiennes, that and Angela Bassett. It seems to have been that got overlooked, and that is such a fantastic movie, shot, scripted, premise, everything else. And Repo Man is the exact same. It's a wonderful film. It does such an amazing job of getting the premise across without it being overly silly. And everything about the film is just phenomenal. And it really deserves a much wider audience. So Repo Man fully deserves its place at number 5 in the best movies of 2010. But it does mean that there are 4 more movies on the list that we believe were better. And the first of those 4, coming in at number 4, is Kick-Ass. It's another comic book adaptation, one that was done so well. Matthew Vaughn directed it, and the cast is fantastic. It's a wonderful cast, introducing some new players. Aaron Johnson came to prominence in this movie, as did Chloe Grace Moretz. Christopher Mintz-Plasse, most famously before this as McLovin, is great in the movie as well. Mark Strong, who is another actor I could watch in anything, is fantastic as the main villain, also Chris Mintz-Plasse's character's father. Nicolas Cage is astounding in the Batman-like role of Big Daddy, and Lindsay Fonseca also adds a little bit of class to the movie. The comic itself was brutal, bloody, and brilliant, so the film had big shoes to fill in relation to that, but Matthew Vaughn knocked it out of the park. He really did. The cast are also great, like I said. Aaron Johnson and Chloe Grace Moretz introduced themselves to the world in these movies, and the Adam West influence on Nicolas Cage's Big Daddy / not Batman was such an amazing performance. It is easily one of Nicolas Cage's best performances, especially as a supporting character rather than a lead. It's just brilliant. Everything about the film, especially if you haven't read the comic it's based on, is subversive. The violence is visceral, the language is expletive laden, especially for someone so young as Hit Girl, which I believe, if I remember correctly, was in the trailer. Her using some rather disturbing language for a young girl. But everything about this film just works. The downbeat nature of being a vigilante in the real world, where things hurt and people are normal. If you get punched in the face really hard, you're going to hurt, you're going to go down, you're going to bleed, you're going to bruise. It's counterbalanced both by the expertly crafted humour in the movie and a genuinely sweet, emotional beats that are peppered throughout. It sets up a sequel nicely. I enjoyed Kick-Ass 2, but it was nowhere near the quality of the first one. But it's a decent movie in its own right. Again, it has some rather brutal moments in it, which are realistic, which you don't really get in comic book movies all that often. I think Super was another one that did a really good job of it, which is a James Gunn movie. If you haven't seen that, go and check it out. But yeah, it sets up the sequel nicely as an ending, and the whole package of the movie is just fantastic. It's one of the best comic book adaptations as far as staying faithful to the source material as well. And while it's not as fantastical and wasn't as successful as the current run of comic book movies as we have, it was still a phenomenal film, and it's fully deserving of placing number 4. But we now get into the medal positions. So who is going to take the bronze in 2010? The answer to that question may surprise a few people, but it's a movie that kind of came from nowhere. Isn't a sequel. It isn't based on any previous works, and it's a film called The Other Guys, which was directed by Adam McKay. It stars Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg in the title roles. Eva Mendes, Michael Keaton, Steve Coogan, Ray Stevenson, and Samuel L. Jackson and Dwayne Johnson in what could be classed as an extended cameo, really. Jackson and Johnson, which sounds like they make toilet paper, they were perfectly cast as the stereotypical macho action heroes that the action movies have idolized for decades. The hero cops who battle through so much, can overcome anything. Doesn't matter how much you physically attack them and assault them, they will always come out on top. In the movie, their characters are idolized by those in the force because of how the results that they get, even ignoring all the collateral damage they do. But the movie sets it up wonderfully to show us that the laws of physics believe in you, even if you don't believe in them. This sets the stage for the titular Other Guys to step up to the plate when an ill-judged leap from a rooftop wipes out Jackson and Johnson's characters and leaves a gap for what in the standard movies would be these background supporting cop characters to take centre stage. Hijinks ensue as Gamble and Holtz, played by Ferrell and Wahlberg, find themselves embroiled in a huge scale conspiracy. This provides plenty of comical moments throughout the movie, specifically a subplot of Gamble being obliviously irresistible to women, including his wife Sheila, played by Eva Mendes, much to the bemusement of Mark Wahlberg's character Holtz. The jokes are broad and subversive, but also filled with side gags, fish out of water humour. Walking away from explosions, myth busting. That scene always gets me. It's fantastically done, and the perfect subversion of what an action hero should be to what a real life situation will be. And of course, there's the obligatory you get one desk pop scene, which is just a phenomenal use of Will Ferrell's comic styling and timing. And this goes to show as well, Mark Wahlberg can do comedy really well. It plays to the strengths of everyone involved, both minor and major characters, and it's one of the best Will Ferrell comedies out there, and I fully recommend it. I feel like it's lost among the more celebrated Will Ferrell movies like Anchorman, Talladega Nights, but for me, this is Will Ferrell at his best. The supporting cast are also fantastic. Wahlberg is fantastic as the co-lead, and it fully deserves its place at number 3 on our countdown. Taking the runner-up spot is another movie that is unfairly overlooked and has a fantastic premise and fantastic turns in the various roles throughout the movie, and that is Daybreakers. It's a vampire movie starring Ethan Hawke in the lead role. Willem Dafoe is a character called Elvis. It's got Michael Dorman in it. Sam Neill is fantastically sleazy. Sam Neill does sleazy really well, and it's a fantastic premise. Now, vampires are awesome. We all know this. vampire movies, even the cheesy, cheap, crap ones, are awesome. Vampire movies are just great. So it stands to reason a vampire movie where the majority of the world is now vampires would also be awesome. And it is. The premise itself is simple. Vampires exist. And when bitten and not fully drained, you yourself become a vampire. Spreading like a virus, there are very few humans left. The vast majority of the population is vampires. So the world has evolved to accommodate the fact that the vast majority of the world are vampires. This, however, does mean that the natural supply of human blood has been severely depleted. As such, corporations create synthetic blood replacements. Think like True Blood in the TV show of the same name, while only the mega rich can afford to buy the real thing. Very similar to the modern day when it comes to certain alcoholic drinks or other things where people sell imitation stuff because they can't afford the real thing and only the rich can. What this means is that there are certain people who are lacking in blood, vampires who are not drinking blood. And when that happens, they become something else. They devolve into what's called subsiders, which are like nasty subterranean Batmen, for lack of... Think man bat, but not as cuddly. Basically, they're mindless creatures, that's what they are. But they are a threat to the remaining humans and vampires alike. But what happens when someone can find a cure to vampirism itself? The film tackles that question very well. It does a wonderful job of showing what a predominantly vampire world would look like, what gadgets would be used to overcome vampiric flaws, such as no reflections. If you don't have a reflection, you can't have a mirror, so how do vampires shave? How do they do their hair? How does this work? And the movie does a fantastic job of showing the technological innovations that would need to take place if the world was populated mostly by vampires. It's a brilliant premise. The set design and the world building is phenomenal. Willem Dafoe is fantastic as Elvis, who is a former vampire and the secret to the cure that could bring back the human race to prominence. Ethan Hawke is magnificent in the lead role. He's another actor who should be a much bigger leading man star than he really is, but I do believe he's happy with the movies he's done and the movie he's doing and the level he's at. I get the feeling he doesn't want to be this blockbusting leading man. He would rather be in the lower budget independent style movie leading man role, which he also excels at, just to be fair. The corporate villain, played by Sam Neill, as I said, is the perfect side of sleazy and also cutthroat in what he will do to keep his corporation at the top of the food chain, literally and figuratively. And as I said at the start of this entry, vampire movies are awesome. And those that do something different with the genre that this movie does, and does it well, they deserve a ton of praise. And while it just misses out on the top spot, Daybreakers is a fantastic movie, takes the number 2 slot in the 2010 countdown, and you've seen the movies that have came before it, so you can see why we think so highly of it to place it in this position. But there can only be one number 1, and that number 1 is Scott Pilgrim versus the World. It's directed by Edgar Wright, who almost directed the version of Ant-Man, which I would love to have seen. I love the Ant-Man we got, but Edgar Wright's would have been fantastic. So it's directed by Edgar Wright, who also did Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. Fantastic films as well. It stars Michael Cera in the lead role, Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Not the movie, not her first movie, but possibly the movie that brought her to the attention of the general viewing public. It also has Kieran Culkin, brother of Macaulay Culkin, who is absolutely brilliant in this movie. Chris Evans, Anna Kendrick, Brie Larson, Alison Pill, Aubrey Plaza, Brandon Routh, Jason Schwartzman, Mark Webber, Mae Whitman, and Ellen Wong. Now that's a hell of a cast list. Some known names, some up-and-coming names, some newcomers spread across the cast list there. And this is based on a very well received, a very revered comic book series. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World wasn't the first title in the series, but it's the perfect one to adapt to the big screen to introduce the character. And the basic premise is Scott Pilgrim meets a girl at a party called Ramona Flowers, is immediately enraptured. We've all been there. Wants to find who she is, they start dating, but she has exes. Now, unlike you and I, she has 7 evil exes. And for Scott Pilgrim to actually continue dating her, he has to defeat these 7 evil exes. And when it was announced they were going to be making this into a movie, it was a very exciting prospect. Especially when Edgar Wright was revealed to be the director of the helm. The perfect cast to portray the characters, and everything was kind of set up to be a success. But success is not guaranteed. But what grabs you with this movie, and as you can tell with it being in the #1 spot, it did succeed. What grabs you with this movie, first of all, is the aesthetic, the way things are shot, and just the general aesthetic of the movie. Edgar Wright fully embraces both the comic book roots and video game inspirations, pretty much from the off. The subversive humour is great. Sound effects appearing on screen as onomatopoeia is an inspired choice for the movie. It really makes it stand out from everything else, and is exactly what you would expect from a comic book panel. The structure of the story is blatantly a love story to video game level design and level progression. Scott Pilgrim, for me, a never better Michael Cera, is at a party, meets the enigmatic Ramona Flowers. For me, a never better Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Falls in love at first sight, and thus begins a quest of love, of friendship, self-belief, self-worth, and a kick-ass set of visuals set to an amazing soundtrack. It's not an exaggeration to say that the music in Scott Pilgrim is almost on a par with the visuals as the importance to the storytelling. So many great songs and instrumentals and just sound beats. Kieran Culkin as the housemate is just perfectly droll in his portrayal of the character. And it's a great counterpoint to the other characters in the movie. Anna Kendrick as his sister. Anna Kendrick's always fun on screen. I love watching whatever she does as well. The 7 evil exes are fantastically cast, amazingly diverse. They are, as I mentioned earlier, it's level progression, so they are end of level bosses that get a little harder and a little more convoluted as we go on. And as the final boss, Jason Schwartzman, again, I used this term for Sam Neill in the previous entry. He is the perfect blend of I'm your friend, but I'm also a sleazy backstabber, and he's fantastic at it. He really is. He's fantastic in this role. And everything just comes together fantastically well. It's just under 2 hours of movie perfection for me. There's too many highlights to mention, but special praise must go, and I'm going to read this so I pronounce it correctly. The Katayanagi twin battle, special praise must go to that. The combination of music, visuals, it's the best set piece in the entire film. And it's one I've watched the movie a number of times, but occasionally when I'm on YouTube, I will get the urge to go and watch that battle just on its own. It's just phenomenal. But the film itself is also absolutely wonderful. It's fully deserving of taking the #1 spot for 2010, and it's the first of our movies to move on to episode 11 to take part in the final countdown. Which movies will join it as we go through movies 2011 to 2019? We will find out as we go through the series, but up next will be year 2011, where we go through another 10 movies to see which will be the second film to go forward to the final countdown. Thank you very much for watching. Please leave your comments below on whether you agree with the movies that have made the list, whether you agree with their placement in the list, what movies you would have put in the list, and which movies you would have taken out to make room for them. Look out for episode 2 covering 2011. Thank you very much for watching this episode on 2010. As I said, leave your comments below, share the video, retweet the tweet if you're reading this on Twitter, share the Facebook post if you're reading it on Facebook, share it on Instagram. The second episode will be up next week, but for now, this is us signing off. Have a great day. We'll see you again soon. Goodbye.